Okay, we are on day 92 of 100 Days of Visibility. There's something that surprises me a little bit about this sort of almost right angle turn that is happening for today, because this starts to feel like I'm blurring a little bit in between the intention of this whole series and the kind of ways that I am likely to use live streaming going forward. Um, we'll have to see, but the yeah, so the place for work for me in today's episode is tracking today's episode in today's episode of Michael's live stream series. In for me, the edge here has to do with keeping my own process of drawing boundaries clean and where the energy is coming from in me. And tracking that and noticing as I'm showing up and as I'm speaking about this, as I'm putting something in public visibility on my Facebook page is like 92 of 100. And I doubt that someone's going to comb through my videos and carefully make sure that they are watching this to know my boundaries. So there's still something to write people can find easily. But this is clearly directed as a kind of communication. So many of the others were sort of using communication as a method of internal work, and I'm still doing that here. A huge amount of the whole point of what I do now has to do with tracking the way that everything is a matter of a kind of shaping my relationship to myself. Um, Even the interactions with others has its foundation in how I relate to myself. So rather than trying to get the other to make an adjustment so that I can relate to the other well so that I can be okay, instead the order is flipped. How am I relating to myself such that these are the resources I'm bringing into my interaction with the other? So, on the other hand, this is like, I am noticing something crystal clear. It's not yet fully gone through the mind machine. Sort of waving over here because I associate the mind now with the left hemisphere of the brain, thanks to Ian McGilchrist. But there's some articulation and some precision to add. But I have a lot of energetic clarity. If you've been watching my series, what I'm noting is, oh, I vividly feel something on the subtle level. And I can now say, great, I am a yes for this part and an absolutely no for this part. And I'm willing to offend, cut off toes, burn, whatever is needed so that the spaces that I energetically occupy do not have this energy in them. Other people are not welcome to bring them. And it's on me in terms of maintaining that, keeping it clean, and in particular for tracking how I'm summoning it. Right? There's a bit of an acknowledgement that seems important here for myself. I'll talk about that if I have time. I have less than half an hour for today's video, so I'm going to see if I can cut to the core. So the video I forwarded yesterday was about Perry Chase saying, "I am canceling cancel culture," and to me it's almost a work of art, very much Perry's art, very Enneagram Type 8. This like, okay, I'm bringing out the energetic flamethrower and just burning this thing down. Uh, a particular version of proclaiming war. I think there's some complication, and I think I've absorbed some of the complication having to do with any time one proclaims war on something, there is an againstness that tends to feed ripples. This part's going to I'm going to leave that part vague. There's a very basic rule that I think I think this is where the concept of karma originated from, or what it evolved into trying to describe before it evolved into something else. But there's a mechanical law of how things interact that this speaks to, and it suggests that proclaiming war it sort of doesn't matter if you're right. What proclaiming war tends to do is encourage the circumstances that require war. This, uh, there's some nuance and detail to add to that, but in this case, I think that's fair. If you proclaim, this faction of the culture war is wrong and bad and needs to die, which is not quite what Perry's doing, but there's a notch in that direction. But any time one proclaims something like that, that actually feeds the war, the overall war, even if you're somehow right. And so there's something to be careful of there. But there is a difference between proclaiming war and being clear about an intention to annihilate something in one's space, even if one's space is huge. So, acknowledging that, but setting it aside, when I was sharing this, part of my intention, part of what was involved in this is me recognizing there is something core to what Perry is doing in her way of orienting to cancel culture that I find correct. It is not particular to cancel culture, but the way that things get canceled, to me, is a very clear indication of a genre of mimetic infection. It is a very particular weakness in the current way that the human soul shows up. It's not a necessary weakness, but it's sort of like everybody complaining about back problems and lower back problems and how you're just going to have back problems when you get older, and this is false. The reason people have back problems often seems to come down to not having developed inner core strength. Right? And because of that, the body tries to compensate in ways that are not what the skeleton can handle, and if you run with that for decades and you neglect your body and you ignore its signals, then it makes its signals louder and demands attention. There's a relatively easy fix, particularly if you start young. Right? This is not true of literally everybody. Some people have degenerative diseases. Some people are just kind of screwed in terms of the neural feedbacks, although we know more about pain science than we use. But there's a the thing that I'm gesturing towards is not when I'm talking about the subtle mimetic infection, this is not like an inherent weakness of human beings. It's something like, hey, there's the need for core strength. And you can learn to feel it yourself. You can see it. You can understand it. It's direct. This thing that's now called cancel culture is, to me, a clear example. And to continue the metaphor a little bit, what Perry is talking about and demonstrating is a way of prioritizing core strength in the face of a particularly cancerous example of back problems of the soul. It's like quite literally a lot of people not having a spine, a lot of people not being willing to stand up in the face of being called all kinds of atrocious things, and having throngs of people being upset at them because you didn't talk about racism in the right way or whatever. So the thing I was so one thing that I wanted to just clear out is, hey, this makes sense to me. If the fact that this makes sense to me offends you, then do both of us a favor and either deal with your offense and digest it, alchemize it so that it becomes a strength for you, or decide that you don't want anything to do with me. Like, pick one. And because that's where it's going to go. I'm not interested in arguing about whether or not whether or not this whole cultural arc makes sense. I'm happy to discuss and explore, but I'm not interested in navigating demands that I show up in a very specific way in order to be deemed an adequate person. I'm just not going to play that game anymore. So the thing I didn't account for, this little bit that I forgot, is that that's not actually the place where I'm most hookable. I've dealt with being condemned before. It's not comfortable, but I basically don't mind. For me, I grew up looking around at an entire species that to me looked insane. And there's still a strong element of this. This is on a different topic. It's related to immortalism. So I had a lot of practice looking around and going, that's great, y'all think I'm nuts. That's because you're nuts. I know I'm right. I can listen to your arguments and read between the lines, but this gets to the core. The energy behind the objections is not in service to truth. The energy behind the objections has more physical and causal, riffing off of the three koshas from yoga philosophy. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it, not essential. You can watch my video from yesterday. I went into a lot more explanation than I had originally planned. I basically gave a taxonomy of experience that I find immensely useful and practical. And I'm accounting for that here. So the thing that actually hooks me, that I actually like, oh, that's interesting. This activates and creates a bunch of defensiveness, and I find myself wanting to argue and get into it, and oh, I'm venting energy into my mind. What am I venting energy from? This immense discomfort in the pit of my stomach, and this kind of fire. And yeah, it's because these people are stupid. No, that's me venting it into my mind again. So the place where I have a challenge, and the place where I have this sort of weakness, this fissure in my psyche, is not around being canceled in the standard way. I'm actually not scared of that. Like there's some practical concern, but I can navigate it. I'm not worried about that part. The part that gets my emotional system much more immediately is a very particular type of bullshit intellectual game. This is so much more common in the circles that I have navigated. And so much more common. I don't know what proportion, because this is a matter of an emotional impact, me tracking an energy. The energy is very loud, but I don't know how many people are prone to doing this or how often. There's this bit of, oh yeah, that person was really mean to me because they were mean to you 3 times over the course of a week. But the rest of the time they were polite, they were nice, they were trying to be considerate, and just had a few grumpy moments. If those 3 things stick out, then there's a kind of salience bias that shows up. So I'm acknowledging I don't really have a way right now to calibrate for a kind of salience bias, but that doesn't mean that what I'm pointing at doesn't exist. I can say very clearly, okay, there is an energy here that is not welcome in my space. What I mean by that, to be clear, is things like what kinds of what the energy is behind the comments that I will allow to just stand in on my Facebook posts. When I cultivate other spaces, I imagine this is totally going to hold. I'll be even more firm about this because I'll be holding a frequency at the subtle level, and that frequency needs to come in pure and clean, and I'm not interested in people vomiting on it. So this bullshit intellectual game, there's a bunch of different versions of it, but the way the game, there's a bunch of ways that this game gets played, and so this is part of where I'm going, okay, this is a first draft, and I'm going to have to play around with this to articulate this clearly. But I'm never going to be able to articulate it clearly to the satisfaction of all of the people who want to play it in my space, because they can sniff out the way that I get hooked here. So part of me drawing the boundaries is me going, oh, I'm done being hooked by this. The hooking structure is still there, but I have chosen, I have an intention. This is going to be cleaned. I spent about 2 hours this morning doing a bunch of yoga and qigong, a bunch of very intense movement arts to burn through. Oh, I'm hookable here. This is bullshit. This makes no sense. I'm a no for this. I'm not done. I need to digest, sort of like if I go and I exercise a lot, my muscles need to recover for me to get stronger. There's healing to do. But it's done. This will not be part of my life going forward. So, the bullshit game on the surface looks like just asking questions and just providing objections, or adding bits of perspective. And there's a kind of plausible deniability that runs behind it that has to do with, well, I'm being civil and I'm just discussing points. I'm just pointing out logic. I'm just having my voice heard. The problem is that if the energy behind what's being said is not curiosity, if it is not knowing, if the energy is instead something of that's wrong and I'm going to show it, or I want to show that I am smarter. Okay? When that's the energy backing what is said, it doesn't matter what's said. This is a point I've made in a whole bunch of videos. I stand by this. This is absolutely a fact about how things work. I don't care if you agree with me or not, because it's something that you can come to see for yourself. What manifests at the physical level is in service to the energy behind it. So therefore, what matters in any case that is not a screaming emergency, and I mean on the level of, are you about to die right now if you don't take action? If it's not on that level, which it basically never is on the internet, if it's not a real emergency, then the only thing that matters is the energy behind what is said. Now, this gets very tricky for people whose minds are fixated on the level of manifestation. I have a hard time feeling the energy. This talk of energy can sound very abstract, it can sound very like woo-woo, it can sound very fluffy, but there's nothing fluffy or vague or woo-woo about how different pieces of music affect the emotions fairly directly. There's a sensation at that level. There's nothing fluffy about that. It's a direct experience. So when minds are fixated on the form, on the way things manifest, what I'm talking about is just going to sound frustrating, it's going to be difficult, and particularly if there is energetic contraction, the subtle level, at this energetic level, with a feeling of ego hurt or defensiveness or closeness or inability to let things in, the sort of left hemisphere locking down on what I have come to call the "that's my mother's arm" phenomenon. It's like the origin of rationalization. I think I've talked about it before. It's worth its own thing. It's a crystal clear pattern when you see it. But anyone who has that going on for them is going to have an immensely difficult time receiving what I'm saying, because their minds will be in service to finding out why what I'm saying is wrong or unfair or unreasonable, how it doesn't make sense in this way or that, how I've misunderstood, blah, blah, blah. Because what those thoughts are in service to is getting away from the uncomfortable sensations of the contraction and trying to manipulate the level of form, the level of manifestation, the physical world, and other people's behavior in it, in order to make the uncomfortable sensations in that person go away. And because the mind is fixated on the level of form, it can't see that that's what's happening. So I imagine that some people who can recognize some of the mechanics of what I'm talking about but cannot feel the subtle level are going to, and like have those properties and watch this video, are going to get pissy. Oops. And the answer is to learn to feel the subtle level. Take a breath. Notice you're responsible for your own emotions. I am not. If I were more skillful, I would be able to deliver this to everyone who might be watching in a way that doesn't create inflammation. I aspire to that level someday, maybe. We'll see how my growth and development goes, but I'm not there. So what I can do instead is try to come from as clear and clean a boundary drawing space as I can, but say, I'm willing to be ferocious here. It's not against the people, this is against a pattern. So I don't mind people coming into my spaces and objecting to my ideas. I'm actually unconcerned about that. Right? That's the level of form, it's the level of manifestation. It's how, like, what's said, how are we dealing with the concepts? That's mechanics. I don't care. That's fine. If someone comes in and says, hey, I don't agree with you here, and I want to share why. Here's some of the things that I observe. Or, hey, what you're saying sounds like it has a distortion in it. Here's the thing that I see that gives me an impression of a distortion. Because then there's a sort of mutual respect. There's an implicit energy, like the energy behind what's said matters most. Right? So there's an implicit energy of, hey, I'm interested in truth. I trust you are as well. Let's collaborate on that. Let's collaborate on truth seeking. Here's a property of what I observe going on in you, or here's a property of the idea. I don't mind that. That's fine. I find that kind of enjoyable, embarrassing, challenging, growth-inducing, and sometimes, like, in practice, my experience is that most of the time when people come to me, not most of the time, that's false. It happens often enough that people come to me with objections that I see straight through. I see why the objection is coming. That to me, it's exciting that they're coming with a collaborative tone, because then I can go, oh, cool. Yeah, I can see why you're making this objection. I imagine it's because of X, Y, Z. Does that seem right for you? Okay, cool. So here's why it doesn't apply. Bop, 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 bop. And sometimes somebody will say, hey, here's an objection I have for you. And I go, oh, is it because of this? No, it's because of blah, blah, blah. Oh, I didn't notice that. Oh, you know what? Okay, this is where I'm coming from. This is the energy behind what had me saying that. And that energy does have this bit of barb, or this bit of twist, or this bit of infection, or this bit of trying to force other people to do something different. Right? So I'm fine with that. That's beautiful. The energy of this kind of collaboration, even with a lot of energy, with a lot of juice, that's fine. But when someone comes in with an energy of domination, or when someone comes in with an energy of you're stupid, right? Or the energy of I'll show everybody how wrong you are, any of that bullshit, no. No, I don't care if your ideas are right. That energy is not welcome in my space. Right? And I will shut it down. I will burn it out, and anybody who refuses to respect that boundary, I will ban. What's the term? Block. I will block. This is in Facebook primarily. This is where most of these conversations happen. This is not a matter of condemning people. This is a matter of saying, oh, that energy is not welcome in my space. The reason I have to draw this boundary at all, for one thing, is because I am susceptible right now to that kind of hooking, and drawing that boundary is part of me purifying the susceptibility in myself. So my temptation is to engage and to say, no, 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 you're not being fair. Look at this thing. Look, here's why your logic is wrong. I played that game for years. It's falling into the trap. This is how stupid flame wars happen between brilliant people on the internet. It's idiotic. And I want nothing to do with it. Right? I feel like there was one piece I dropped. What was the piece I dropped? Yeah. So I want to be like this. I think it's worth noting that the thing that I'm pointing at is one of the standard modes of discourse and engagement that I see in STEM-flavored areas. Some of my thickest exposure to this was in the rationality community in the Bay Area, which emerges enormously from a sort of an attempt to fuse philosophy and programming. It's probably the shortest way to express that. And I'm reminded of how, like Richard Feynman would talk about how in doing debates with fellow physicists about different ideas, they would say things like one person would present something and the second person would say, oh, no, 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 that's stupid. This is completely wrong because blah, 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 blah. And then the first one would go, no, you're wrong. How could you be so thick-headed about this? Like, here's this thing. And there's an element there that is very important for getting the form right. that seems to be of service in some corners of STEM work. STEM is like science, technology, engineering, mathematics, which is meant to describe a flavor. This also includes programming and certain areas of philosophy. So I'm not trying to condemn this behavior as inherently bad or wrong. I am noticing that it is toxic for the kind of work that I want to do, and that I am a no for that being in my space. I am fine with challenges. I am fine with collaboration. And in particular, I bet that with Feynman, with Richard Feynman, the energy of the interaction would have much clearer a baseline of we're good, and like a kind of laughter and enjoyment, where the like even the you're wrong is it's not even there's no element of personalness to it. I could be mistaken. I've seen a whole lot of different mathematicians and physicists and programmers like dive into this kind of cultural thing. Will come in with cute quips about, yes, Professor so-and-so thinks XYZ, and as you can clearly see, XYZ implies W, which is silly, right? And it's like, well, what's that about? That's dominance. That's just dominance, right? The idea, like putting out the idea, saying, well, XYZ implies W, which seems absurd, so let's account for that. Different energy. Different energy. So I'm not making a request. I am stating something that will be a fact in my space. That energy is not welcome. I understand that most people are energetically numb. They have no idea what they're doing at the energetic level. Okay? Well, their mind, their conscious identity has no idea. They do. They do. But it's convoluted. It's sort of like an abandonment of responsibility for one's own energetic holding. And everybody has the right to do that, but the thing is, if anybody who doubles down on these patterns is not going to be in my space for very long, because it can't withstand the clarity with which I am bringing this intention into the subtle realm. The way that mechanically manifests is, when I see these patterns show up, I will castrate them. I will pull them out and display them. Or I'll just cut them, I'll just hamstring them. And people who insist on showing up, thanks Ian. Ian Wood says, warrior energy. Yes, I am drawing a line. Anybody who does not have within them the spiritual maturity to both learn what I am pointing at and decide to shift, will either, like they can either decide on their own to take their mess elsewhere, or I will block them. So as a matter of fact, this energy will not be in my space with any duration. It will have no power. So anybody who wants to stay in my space, you don't have to tiptoe. Right? Just come from a place of sincere desire to learn. Not necessarily from me, but a desire to hold both 100% humility. I don't know. I am willing to recognize that I know nothing. And 100% seeking 100% clarity. Let me see if I can understand this. If you can come from a clear space like that, I don't care what your view is. It's pure, it's engage withable, and that is welcome. And if you hold that intention and you slip up, I'll point it out. I'm not condemnatory happy. I'm just being crystal clear. The problem is not bringing the energy in. The problem is intending to. Or abandoning your own capacity to hold your intentions and letting a mind virus mechanically control what energies you inject and choosing to inject that shit. Not welcome. Okay. So I'll end up writing up something, putting it on my Facebook wall, might even make it clearly visible. I like the way that Perry Chase does this. She has rules for her space. Making it easy for people to find that, yeah, I will probably develop a couple of rules or guidelines. That seems good. But for those of you who've been following along and want to have a sense of what kind of thing I'm cultivating, here is an example of a place where I am keeping things clean. So that's it. Time for me to go. Thanks for listening.